Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the February Community Food Projects Community of Practice. Really glad to have you here. Thanks for taking time to be with us. I'm Susan Lightfoot-Shemp. I'm the co-director of the Wallace Center, steward of the Food Systems Leadership Network. I'm here with our partners from the Institute for Social and Economic Development. We've got Andy Fisher and Emma Bliss, and my colleague at the Wallace Center, Andrew Carberry. Today, we are going to be talking about the sharpening up those grant writing skills. So we're going to be doing a little bit of a overview of a training that we had yesterday. Andy, nice balloons. That was a great. Um, Anyways, sorry. Okay, before we get rolling, let's introduce ourselves in the chat, y'all. We got some great people here. Would love to hear from you. It is Black History Month. February is and will always be Black History Month. So invite you to introduce yourselves in the chat and share who is a Black food systems leader who inspires and challenges you to stay true to your values, no matter what. And I am going to just shout out her name today. Mama Karen Washington is somebody that inspires me day in, day out. Was in a meeting with her the other day, and she had the most beautiful way of talking about DEI: dangerous, educated, and invincible. So sending out some love to Mama Kay and encourage you to share who gives you. Oh, yes, Liz Ogilvy. Shout out to Liz, an extraordinary leader in Massachusetts. Also, such a great human being and so inspiring. Thank you, Jason, calling Liz in. And yeah, please share your thoughts in the chat. We'd love to hear who else is inspiring and challenging you to stay true to your values. Rashid Nuri, yeah, thanks, Andrew. Another incredible leader based in, I think, Atlanta is where Rashid is. Um, all right. So yes, Malik, Baba Malik. Yes, Shiny Flannery. Thanks, Eliza. Glad you're here. Shiny was featured in a amazing compilation that we created some years ago about the power of community-based food systems. I should try and find that document and link it in the chat. Shiny is an extraordinary person also. All right, so just want to be really honest. We're going into a conversation about fundraising, funding, money in a time that we are all feeling the stress and anxiety of the federal funding freeze. We are in an unprecedented moment. I hate using that word because I feel like I've been using it for years now. Everything's unprecedented. But this is truly a different level of unprecedented that we find ourselves in right now. I'm sure that some of you are maybe experiencing funding, like you're not able to draw down on your grants right now. We're in that case. The Wallace Center has quite a lot of money that we're waiting to be repaid. It's really stressful. We don't know the future of our grants and the future of federal funding over the next couple of years. So just want to be really honest about that and just invite folks to realize that you are within a group of people who are having a shared experience to a great extent around the impacts of the federal funding fees on our organizations and also the people that we serve, the farmers in our communities, the farm workers and laborers and immigrants that really make food production possible in our communities, and the ripples. I mean, there's so many levels of this. So just being really frank and direct about the moment that we're in. So just honored, given that all that is happening, I appreciate you taking the time to be together in this community of practice today. Yesterday there was a training. We did a 4-hour grant writing training with Dr. Hunter Goodman. And what we want to do today is bring some of the highlights from that conversation and that training to this discussion. Not everybody was able to be there, so we can share that back. We'll do a report back from the grant writing training Andrew's then going to share a couple of the tools that we use at the Wallace Center for our grant writing and proposal processes. So just trying to get more resources out to y'all. And then we're really going to open it up for discussion to share, what's working for you, what questions do you have, how can we really resource each other? That's the plan for today. And I just, again, recognizing that this moment that we're in makes conversations about funding ever more fraught. It's already really layered and complicated. And so, just being real about, the fact that federal funding, which is in the past been considered the most stable of funding sources, is pretty much totally up in the air. And so, any of the feelings that you're coming into this conversation today are valid. And we're in this together. Let's get into our community agreements. And, if those of you who've been coming to these community practice calls, you know that we always ground ourselves in the FSLN cultural agreements before we get going. It's really important for us to take care of each other and ourselves when we're in this space, and we can cultivate a culture of care when we're together. So just put these up here for a minute, invite you to embrace these, maybe shout out one that you really want to be mindful of today. I think meeting each other where we are, showing up is enough, and listening is participating. That's something that I want to lift up today. And oh, my screen's acting up. There we go. And then let's go to the next one for Zoom housekeeping. Just want to encourage folks to please rename yourselves and add your pronouns. And also, if you could just remain on mute when you're not chatting, but don't let that mute button keep you from chatting, because this is very much aiming to be a space for discussion and exchange. And thank you to those who are able to turn on your videos. It's really nice to talk to other human beings. And, just encourage you to use the chat, unmute, ask questions, etc. And just a couple of things, as we're in sort of a really peculiar time, we just want to be really increasingly more mindful about community safety in these community practice calls. So um, I think that it's really important that we keep the AI bots out of our discussions, just so we can be frank. And so we'll be moving AI bots and note takers and such into the waiting room or denying their entry for the community of practice calls for now. So maybe Andy, if I could ask you to move any of the bots that might be in here, the note takers, just put them in the waiting room rather than rejecting them, because I think if you reject them, it means they can't ever get back in. And also just noting, we're just going to record like the presentation aspects of our discussion today, or of our meeting today, and pause the recording when we get to small group breakouts, when we're asking questions, when we're just having like open, candid conversation, so that folks can feel really safe, like saying what you want to say without concern about where that information might go. So those are a couple of the ways that we're aiming to try to create more of a sense of safety within the community of practice. All right, we're coming into this conversation. We all have different experiences with grant writing. Some of us are kind of old hats and have been at it for a long time. And other folks might be brand new to the conversation. And so wherever you fit in that spectrum, you are welcome here, whether you're seeking or you're sharing or you're doing both. We all always have more to learn, and ways that we can sharpen up our skills around grant writing. And I just want to tell just kind of a quick story about my own experience. My very first grant that I ever wrote was in 2005. And I literally hand delivered a printed out, front cover painted, hand bound paper proposal to the Mendocino Community Foundation, to support, this is over 20 years ago, to support the Noyo Food Forest, which was the small community based organization that I was getting going up in Northern California. And I walked in there, but we had put so much time and energy into putting together this absolutely beautiful proposal. It had like a story within it that we described, like the future that we wanted to see. We had painted this like beautiful picture of what the community garden would look like with the funding that we were asking for. And I walked in there so proud and so excited, and I handed it to the ED of the community foundation, and she literally laughed out loud at me. Had never had somebody do that before. And we did not get that grant. Suzanne Norgard, she did end up giving us funding in the long run, but it was quite an experience. It was kind of humiliating for me as a young leader. The first time I'd ever like poured my heart out on the page. Um, but then, the second one that I went for just a few months later, totally again, like labored over this thing because the proposal writing process itself was really a great process for clarifying our mission. We were a brand new nonprofit trying to figure out who we were, what we were doing. So, like clarifying our goals, our partnerships, our resources and assets that we had, what we were looking for, like going through that process was a great learning process. Didn't get that grant either. But the process of doing it itself there was always something to glean from it, always something to learn. So thankfully, over time, the tides turned for our organization, and I'm really proud to say that the Noya Food Forest is still going strong 20 years later, after that initial failure at trying to get funding back in 2005. Um, but every single time that I've written a proposal, and I hope that you found this true as well, that you go through a lot of different emotions, from dread to delight to excitement, but also like that there's always something to glean, always something to learn, always some way that we can sharpen up our strategy and our program through the process of proposal writing. So I'm curious, to hear from you all, where are you in this process? How do you feel about grant writing? I got a poll. Let's see. Launch the poll. I can do it. You guys seeing this? So how do you really feel about grant writing? Do you love it? You're seasoned and successful, happy to share your tricks. You like it, got some wins under your belt, but definitely still steep on the learning curve. Got to have a meh option. You do it because you have to. Nope, you'd rather visit the dentist every day than write a grant, or no idea. So just a few more minutes or another minute or so to get more answers in here. All right. Thanks everybody who responded to the poll. It looks like y'all, if I end the poll, does it show the results? Is that how that works? Yeah.
Yeah, end poll, and then it says launch or broadcast. Then it will say broadcast, everybody, I believe.
Share results. Here we
Oh.
go. Okay. So we got a great mix as always. A lot of folks that, no idea, first timers. Welcome to the first timers. And we've got some folks that have a good bit of experience. Would love to if they're brave, who loves it? Andy, did you consider yourself as loving it? Nice.
I didn't get to vote because I'm a co-host, but yeah, I love it. I
Oh,
love it. I
okay.
hate it. You
You
know,
love it. Anybody other brave souls that want to share that they're the ones that said they love it?
I said I love it, but it's really somewhere between that and like it.
Okay, thanks, North. And then Jason, did you also raise your hand? Cool. Okay, so we've got some seasoned grant writers in the room, and then we've got some folks that really would rather go to the dentist every day than write a grant. So I got to be honest, I think I'm really in that camp to some degree. I really don't like proposal writing, but it's just a necessary component of our work. So just know that wherever you sit within that spectrum, it's all real. We're all experiencing mixed emotions around grants. So thanks for sharing that. Yeah, I think I hear this point about like the rejection's really hard. It really is. And not taking that personally and not taking it as like an indictment of your organization and your work it's tough. I think every single one of us, no matter how valuable our work is and that we know it is, when you get that no, it really stings. It's really hard. Y'all, I don't know if you watch or if you're following crappy funding practices on LinkedIn. It's really cathartic. It was started, I want to say it was like, in Vu Lee kind of crew from Nonprofit AF. They have it's a group on LinkedIn that outs bad practices by funders and kind of calls them out for it and like really like kind of shames them in LinkedIn. But there some of these foundations and what they're asking for like $5,000 and the amount of requirements and questions and all this, it's absurd. So there's really, there's a lot that needs to shift within this field and practices. And then at the same time, there are funders that are doing things differently, that are, they're making things a lot simpler. So, there's a range of foundations and grant proposal opportunities. It's important to find one that really fits for you. Um, all right, so let's move into just doing a quick overview of Dr. Goodman's training, and then we will open up for some discussion. So, y'all, I am just going to be really honest here. Like, I am clearly not Dr. Goodman. The plan was for Dr. Goodman to be here, and she ended up not being able to be here for unforeseen reasons. So I am going to do my best to channel the insights and major takeaways from yesterday into the conversation today. But really also welcome anybody else, Emma, I know you were there, and Andrew was there, other folks that were in the conversation to chime in and share what you learned from yesterday as well. So I want to just give credit where credit is due. The next number of slides and information and all the resources that Andrew will be dropping into the chat, they all came from Dr. Hunter Goodman, who is the Assistant Professor for Community, Workforce, and Economic Development at the University of Arkansas System Division of Agriculture Cooperative Extension. So she works in Cooperative Extension, and she worked with a crew of other extension professionals to develop this grant writing curriculum. And it has been tried and true. It was a great resource. We can drop the slides in the chat for all of you. It's a great, really, really helpful curriculum. Definitely like got down to the fundamentals. And then also some credit to the Assets-Based Community Development Institute, the ABCD Institute, DePaul University Jeter Institute, and Dr. Angela McCauley that co-created the assets-based community development content that's in the slides forthcoming. All right, so here are just like, from my notes, some of the key takeaways from the 4-hour training yesterday. Something that Dr. Goodman really emphasized was that while the context around us is rapidly changing, the fundamentals of solid grant writing and proposal development, project development, et cetera, they remain the same. That in all cases, come hell or high water, a successful application is going to be at the intersection of meeting the technical requirements that whatever that funding opportunity is requiring of you, meeting that with really solid communication about what you're doing, what it is that you want to do and why. It's always going to be an overlap. You could tell a great story, but if you don't have the right attachments or don't include a narrative summary, and that's one of the requirements that's listed in the proposal application, you will get thrown out. So it's always going to be the combination of those two things. You could also have all the technical requirements, but not be clearly communicating the story of your work, and you'll get thrown out. So it's always going to be at the, if there's a Venn diagram, it's the overlap of those two areas. Technical requirements met, and telling a really clear, compelling story about what it is that you want to do and why. I think another thing that Dr. Goodman really emphasized yesterday, and she said it, she's like, she's been writing grants for 20, 30 years at this point, and she is still growing and learning and always like learning how to get better at it. And she still gets that sting of rejection. She said that yesterday. So, we all experience that. And whether you're brand new or, you've been in it for a long time, we can always be strengthening our skills. So I found it really helpful yesterday to just kind of go back to the fundamentals of what it takes to put together a really solid proposal. She really emphasized the importance on getting clarity on the 6 W's. So it's actually five W's and an H. I don't know why she said 6 W's, but before before an RFP drops, it is absolutely key to successful proposal writing is to get first really clear on why you are doing this work. Like that's your mission. What it is, like your goals. What is it that you're really wanting to do right now? Who's going to do it? When are they going to do it? Where are they going to do it? How are they going to do it? I know that, we learned all these great questions, who, what, when, where, now when we were in elementary school, but ultimately that's the information that a reviewer needs to know to be able to say, yeah, okay, I understand what it is that you're trying to do. So it is really obvious, but it's also helpful to get back to those basic 6 W's. Dr. Goodman also really emphasized the importance of sticking with the ABCD approach, assets-based community development. And I'll share a couple of slides here in a minute. On my reflections of ABCD, I was thinking about what a helpful framework that is in this time of, DEI being dangerous terminology or outlawed or whatever we're going to call it. That ABCD is a time-tested and long-standing approach that is essentially the same thing as DEI, but uses different terminology. So I also feel like there's some great resources that we as a sector can pull from in this ABCD approach. And then finally, I think she ended her conversation yesterday by just really encouraging everyone to not give up. You will get rejected. You will get no's. But that does not mean that you shouldn't keep going and try for a different proposal, learn from that proposal, get feedback, sharpen the next one, go for the same opportunity the next year, and try again. So maybe I'll just pause quickly and see, Andrew, Emma, anything like high level takeaways, and then I'll kind of go into the particular slides.
I think one for me was the time we spent on partnerships and how critical those are. And a lot of funders want to see people working together to do something they couldn't do alone. And I didn't get to take the poll earlier, but I think that's one of my favorite things about grant writing is working on new partnerships or working with new people in the organization. And just how that should start before the RFP, just building good relationships.
Nice. Yeah, and just some support for that in the chat. Really important to leave enough lead time. Dr. Goodman also really emphasized that yesterday, that ideally even the things that we're about to go into, these happen way before the RFP drops. It's like getting really clear on what it is that you want to do and then going to look for the opportunity. We all know that that's hard to do when we're just in a constant process of trying to respond to what other funding opportunities are actually out there for us, and managing the implementation of our work and all the other things that are going on. So, we know that there's a balance there. All right, let's go to the next slide. So Dr. Goodman led us through a pretty kind of sequential process here of first getting really clear on what it is that we want to do. And the tool and framework that she shared was on SMART goals. I'll share that in just a second. Getting really clear on what is the thing we're aiming to achieve. Secondly, what do we have? Who are we working with? Who could we be working with? And that goes to Andrew's point of the partnerships. and also looking at what we have from an assets-based community development lens. Third, identifying what's missing. So, we know what we want to do. Here's what we've got. What's the gap? And she did, I'm not going to go so much into this, but she really talked about like determining gaps and finding potential grants, like some of the best practices around finding good opportunities. And then fourth, being able to connect the dots between those pieces, between what it is that you want to do, what you have to work with, and how you're going to go about it. And so she gave us a great, like very simplified approach to developing a logic model, which is what helps to communicate what it is that you're trying to do. So let's go to the next slide. So SMART goals. Raise your hand if this is something that you're familiar with. You guys using SMART goals? Okay, Paige, I see your hand. I see some other folks. Looks like, this is, it's pretty like standard, but also like how often are we actually doing them and actually writing SMART goals? Like I think a lot of us know what they are, but are we actually writing out SMART goals? That's another question. So SMART stands for specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time bound. So I found this next slide really helpful. So when we say specific, what exactly is it that you want to achieve? Where are you going to focus your efforts? Measurable. How will you measure progress towards the goal? How will you know that you've arrived at the goal? If there is not like a number in there in your SMART goal, then you're probably missing something. That's the measurable. Attainable. Do you actually have the resources to achieve the goal? Are there barriers that might prevent you from achieving it? Relevant, just making sure this is really something that matters. Is important for your community. Does it matter? Does it bring benefit? And time bound, really putting some parameters on by the end of 2025 or by, after 2 years of implementation or whatever that is, but like giving it a really specific date for achieving the goal. So then moving to that second part around, identifying what you have to work with, this is where some of the assets-based community development tools came into play. So, again, going back to this thinking, what do you need? Who might be able to help? And who shares your interests? So there was a great resource around the partnership matrix, which Andrew, if you could drop that resource into the chat. Just noting that these resources that Andrew's downloading go with these different sections of the slides in her presentation. So we'll share the whole slide deck with y'all too, so that you can kind of go back and go through these. That SMART goals handout, just to kind of step back for a second. Andrew, is there anything you want to highlight about that handout? I looked at that one honestly yesterday.
About the SMART goals, let me pull that up.
Yeah.
That one, I think it's like you said earlier, but having this before the grant drops, like if you have a couple of these and then you can identify something that aligns with what you already want to do, especially like what you want to achieve, and then the time frame you would scale to the grant. So we talked some about that of like you might have a 10-year plan and then the grant is 1 or 2 years, so you have to pull things back, everything to scale it back to meet that, and not over promising. So making sure it's achievable in the eyes of the reviewers. Sometimes it's tempting to put a lot more in, but then people will look at it and say, well, you can't actually do that. So keeping it realistic.
Yeah, thank you. So let's go to the next slide. I'm going to try to get through these kind of quickly so we can get to discussion. Just thinking again about, what you have in your community. I felt like these were just really great takeaways. Discovering what's strong, not what's wrong, and working from there. I do think that as a community, we're pretty good about this, of like painting a picture of like how many assets we have in our communities and how to build on those. But there's still pretty strong tendency to like talk about the gaps and the needs. And, just I think it's a challenge and an opportunity to think about how we present the story in a way that helps to strengthen a narrative of community leadership, of strength in our communities, of resilience in our communities, and not painting a picture that's like a deficit model. So, this is really where a lot of the conversation about partnerships came into play. Let's go to the next slide. There's a really great comparison between an assets-based community development approach and a social service model. Really comparing the differences between focusing on our assets when we're preparing for a proposal and putting together ideas rather than focusing on needs, building on opportunities rather than emphasizing and focusing on the problems, thinking about investment rather than charity. So, this kind of like so what I'm looking for, just like the distinctions between these approaches can be kind of subtle, but also pretty significant. So come back to these and review these later. Let's go to the next slide. This is my last part of the presentation, and then we'll move on, promise. So logic models. So one of the things that Dr. Goodman was reminding us is that a logic model is not necessarily something that you're going to include in your proposal, but the logic model is something that helps you to clarify your thinking and clarify what it is that you're going to do in the project, so that then once you have that really well laid out, then you can go into the actual writing process and be able to communicate that really effectively. And so go to the next slide that kind of does a little bit of the breakdown. This helps to indicate how we go through those, like the what, how, when, where, why, etc. So thinking first about, you start on the right-hand side. What are the long-term outcomes that you're aiming for in your project? What is the condition that you want to change over time? So that might be, about like increasing community food security in X neighborhood by, 2050. It could be kind of a long range, long-term outcome. But then pulling that back a little bit and saying, what are the behavior changes that will lead to that condition that you want to change? So that would be the medium-term outcome. Short-term outcome is attitudes, knowledge, or skills that are needed to lead those changes in behavior. Who needs to take the action is the target audience. What actions will you take to get that target audience to change? And then what resources do you have to support those actions? This was a really simple approach to a logic model. There's a lot of different ways that one can develop a logic model. But I felt like this was a really helpful kind of outline for one. Andrew, I know this is something that you've worked with a lot. Is there anything you would raise up based on what she shared yesterday on logic models?
I put in the chat, there's a more like the evaluation plan is a logic model. So just even if it's, if it's not required in the grant, you need a logic model to do the evaluation plan. But they are important. Actually, I'm submitting a grant tomorrow that we didn't do a logic model. So like it would have benefited from that as I was looking at it after the training yesterday. But even a simple one like this, I think helps align the team that's writing it and would make the narrative smoother. So it could look like an extra step, but I think it definitely is worth doing, which I need to hear myself.
Yeah, that's a really good point too, Andrew. Is like the process of doing this with your team and your partners is so helpful in making sure that we're on the same page. We're like discovering and developing the idea together and knowing what it is that we're aiming to achieve. This could be a really helpful discussion process with your team and kind of a design process. And I know that for the proposals where we've done this on the front end, it's in the implementation side of things has gone so much smoother because we were aligned on what it was that we were trying to do by having worked on a logic model together. like much more effective in implementation. Andrew was going to share a couple of tools, and then we're just going to like open up for some questions. Andrew, you want to go?
Yeah, sure. I'll go ahead and put these links in the chat. So these are things that we use at Winrock in our proposal writing. And there's two. I want to share a proposal calendar, which might seem funny, but it's actually been really helpful to us. And again, makes a difference. Can you see that okay? No? Yeah, okay. So this is actually the one that we're submitting tomorrow. So it's real for the most part. But somebody on the team will set up a calendar starting with, the due date. So it's due this Friday, and we're planning to submit tomorrow, and work back from that. And it helps to make a realistic plan of having, like, do you have actually time to write and do each piece? And starting with the calendar just brings up a lot in our process that we have. So there's a go, no go meeting, and someone was asking, I think Andy was asking, like, do you have a threshold for the maximum or minimum grant you go for? That's part of that first decision of like, if it's 30,000, is it within your range? Is it worth doing it based on what they're asking for? And then from that, discussing the technical needs, like just going over the RFP really well, making sure everyone on the team reads that, and drafting in the calendar will include holidays and like staff out of office, because we want to make sure we can thread between people picking up different pieces of it. And so there's review points, like there's the budget and the narrative and our process are separate. So there's like a team that reviews the budget and that reviews the narrative. So that was here the 30th was we're getting feedback on that. And then, the last month of it is really when it heats up. But there's a team that does the first draft of the narrative review. And we have different names for it. It's like mint for the first one, and then green for the second review. But so usually one person is point on writing, and then there's two or three people that review. They would have looked at it Wednesday and then sent feedback, or we'd even meet that Thursday or Friday for the writer to get feedback from the team. And then about a week later, they'd look at the second draft, meet to review that, and then have time to do final edits last week. And then this week, so we have to, as a larger organization, we have to get a lot of, like, 6 people to sign it before we can submit. And so that was sent actually Tuesday. So we pushed this back a day, but it was done yesterday. And they also give feedback on the budget or staff terms and things. And so we've updated that, and then hopefully submitting tomorrow. But this document and just laying it out helps to clarify the teams and who's doing what, and helped us bring in, like, we didn't have a reviewer for the second narrative, so I asked someone on the team to look at that. And even just like discussing the ideas with someone who I hadn't worked with before helped me to build a relationship with them, and they're understanding this portfolio of work better. So it's a good like team building thing. Even if we don't get this one, I think we've developed a new concept through the process, and more people have an understanding of it. And this is close to the due date. We try to give usually, I think, a week before to have our submission. We might have started with that and then just pushed it back. But yeah, that's the calendar, and the link in the chat you can download and just edit. There's nothing magical about it. Yeah, any questions on that? Or Susan, anything you want to highlight?
I think you touched on this a little bit, but like one of the things that we do in that go, no go meeting, if we decide to go for it, is we then clarify the roles on the proposal team. So who's going to be the budget lead, who's going to be the technical lead, and meaning the technical, like the actual like writing the narrative component. If it requires like letters of support and partnerships, like who's going to lead on those components. So it's like getting really clear on like what are we going to need to do to put together a proposal? What are the like core functions? Who's going to do which of those? and then building out the calendar so that each of those people that's in the lead role knows when they need to have these different workflows completed by. It may seem like process heavy, but having that structure is really helpful for holding the team accountable and keeping everything moving forward. So that's just something in terms of the calendar. I think the other thing is just like using Google Calendar or Outlook or whatever it is that you have, like actually then translating the due dates for the pink review, as we call it, which is that initial draft, when that's due. And so folks can hold time on their calendar to actually do the review on that day. So it's really about, kind of almost project managing the proposal process itself so that we're all working together to achieve, what we need to by the submission date.
Yeah, this is a blank budget. Was designed for USDA, so it has federal and match. But I'll just start with so the way this works, there's a lot of formulas. So the input tab will populate the rest of it. So just filling in the basics on it, and then the indirect cost rate, if it's different from the match, and the funder and fringe, and then that way it'll calculate as you put in your budget numbers, the total including that. So I'll just go, there's an example here that's filled out, and so it starts with staff and then full-time and part-time, and then their fringe is down here, and the rates are there, and then you can this is by month, which we usually actually do days, but however you have your staff allocated, and then you can adjust it in yellow, and that'll flow through the whole budget to make updates. But it's got travel, this just kind of, again, examples, flights, and then equipment, supplies, and then we have different categories for consultants. So seems like it was an RFSP example, but it's got a assessment lead, pretty large consultant, and then sub-grants to 8 organizations. And looks like there's 8 per year. Again, you hadn't called that out, but it's a 3-year budget that totals up. And then subcontracts. Here, there's a line for an evaluation, which is good to have an external evaluator. That's a whole nother topic, but it's good to have someone who's, not on your team doing that. And then a facilitator for the meetings, graphic designer, online trainer. And then, so there was staff travel above, and then this travel is about like events for the project wide or like stakeholder meetings. So it's got those, and then communications, Zoom or whatever baseline you need, and then it calculates the ICR at the bottom based on everything above. And yeah, this one is a 300,000. So that's an example, and then these are blank. And I would encourage you just to play around with it. That's how I've learned is just you can plug in numbers and start messing around to see how it adds up. And just usually start with staff on ours, and then see based on the budget, what are the core program offerings, things you need to offer for partners, and building them in. I know that was fast, and I think it's the same for the federal and the match, but sometimes you're required to have a detailed budget if you have a match donor or match funding. So this sets you up to do that, and then also has a summary that's like sometimes our internal process is more rigorous than the donor, so we can just share a simplified version in a proposal.
Yeah, and these categories for sure map to the Agricultural Marketing Service grant opportunities. I think, Andy, are these the same budget categories as community food projects? They tend,
I think so. It looks pretty similar.
yeah. Yeah, it tends to be kind of consistent across federal grants in terms of like the budget categories. And so that's what this budget is really, as Andrew was saying, kind of, mapped to USDA opportunities. But you can definitely play around with this, make this template your own, this is for y'all. You can have it. It's just a great place to start. If your organization has a negotiated indirect cost recovery rate, so a NICRA, you can also add that in so that it applies the different percentages to the different kind of cost categories within the budget. But also, if you're brand new to this is a great place to just start playing around with project budgets of like seeing how, they can add up very quickly over time. And you think they're like, oh wow, it's like $100,000, this grant opportunity, and then you start to like actually break it down into what you need and see how quickly that money can get spent. But it's a great tool. So really happy we can share that with y'all.